Okay. Um, we have a few folks online. Hey, Darcy, is there, and Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 3. Darcy just cited Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 3. 3, 1 through 3. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. And it goes on to say, just to finish this up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So this gets to the fact that there's a season for everything. And it goes on to say in other places in Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun. So,
Has to do with his father passing this week.
pardon me?
Has to do with his father passing
Ah,
last week.
okay.
I'm sure.
Okay. So everybody knows that Mark's father did pass away. Yeah. And we've been praying for him, and been a difficult time, I think, for Mark and for Darcy. So pray for them. Continue to pray for them. All right. So hopefully this week I don't mess up with the videos. I only have one video this week, and the continuing spirit of looking at things that help us to believe what we believe. And the one I picked this week is only about a 9-minute video. And the title of it is The Bible Gets It Right. Jesus' Crucifixion has to do with archaeological. Now, we all know that Jesus was crucified. But is there any evidence to support that he was crucified? Well, archaeological evidence, maybe not Jesus specifically, but there is evidence to support that crucifixion was a means of death. And this is a short video that deals with that topic. A guy by the name of Joel Kramer, who is featured here. He's an
This Black Friday
archaeologist,
gift is my
and
favorite dentist hack to clean my
again, this is
retainers.
about
If you
a
wear a retainer
9 minute.
every
I'll
night
let it
like I
just
do,
speak
you
for
know how
itself.
hard it is.
Welcome to Expedition Bible. I'm Joel Kramer. Today I'm going to be talking about the archaeological evidence for crucifixion. In the New Testament, we have a detailed account of Jesus' crucifixion. And for example, in Acts 2:23, it says of Jesus, they put him to death by nailing him to the cross. Is there any archaeological evidence that the Romans put Jews to death by nailing them to crosses? In 1968, in the northeast area of Jerusalem, a tomb was discovered and excavated. And inside this tomb was found one of these limestone bone boxes called an ossuary. And inside of the ossuary were found the remains, according to the excavation report, of an individual male between 24 and 28 years old. Now, according to the excavation report, both of the ankle bones of this individual had been pierced by an iron nail, and this undoubtedly was a case of crucifixion. In fact, one of the heel bones of this individual had a nail still embedded through it. We know the name of this individual because it's inscribed onto the ossuary itself. His name is Yehohanan. And so this embedded nail through Yehohanan's ankle is on display at the Israel Museum, but this is a replica. The real artifact is kept in a lab down in the Department of Anatomy and Anthropology at the University of Tel Aviv, where it's still studied by scholars today. And if you look at the nail sticking through Yehohanan's ankle bone, you'll see that the tip is bent. And what is believed to have happened is that when it was driven through his ankle into the wooden beam, it hit a knot of wood and that bent the tip of the nail. So when the Romans came to retrieve the nail to reuse it, it was stuck. And they ended up having to cut it out of the wood. And so Yehohanan ended up being buried with the nail still sticking through his ankle, which allowed this archaeological evidence to be preserved and to be found later by archaeologists. The drawing of Yehohanan is only of his lower half because it's undetermined how his hands were attached to the cross. However, we know from the archaeological evidence that his feet were nailed to either side of the beam of the cross through his ankle bones. So there's no question that Yehohanan ended his life nailed to a cross. In 1970, another tomb nearby this first one was discovered and excavated, and inside of it also was found an ossuary. And inside of this ossuary, 3 iron nails were found with bones still fused to them. So these bones were originally turned over to Dr. Niku Haas, who was the leading physical anthropologist in Israel at the time. He studied them and determined that this was further evidence for crucifixion, that this individual, who he determined to be about a 25-year-old male, ended his life nailed to a cross through his hands, and it was his hand bones that were still fused onto these nails. Now, these nails are also kept at the same lab down at the University of Tel Aviv, and they have been studied today by Dr. Israel Hershkovitz. And Dr. Hershkovitz has studied them intensively under a very high-powered microscope, and he has determined that when the nails were driven through this individual's hands, that it broke some of the hand bones, and it's the bones from his hand bones that are fused still to these nails. Dr. Hershkovitz is in agreement with the original interpretation by Dr. Haas that this is, in fact, further evidence of crucifixion, that this individual died being nailed to the cross through his hands. Now, in this case, they're not sure how his feet were attached to the cross, and so we have the illustration based on the archaeological evidence showing the upper part of this man's body and how his hands were nailed to the cross. So when we bring these two illustrations together, we get this composite view of a crucified man from the 1st century AD, the time of Jesus, based on archaeological evidence of what crucifixion looked like at that time, and it matches perfectly with the descriptions that we have in the New Testament of Jesus' crucifixion. Again, Acts 2:23 says that they put him to death by nailing him to the cross. We also have, after his resurrection in John 20:25, the disciple Thomas, who felt the nail marks in his hands where the nails were. And so this image that we have of Jesus nailed to a cross through his hands and his feet is supported by the archaeological evidence.
Interesting, huh?
What's that man's name?
Pardon me?
That man's name?
Joel Kramer.
Joe?
I think it's Joel Kramer, yeah. And he's got a website. He's got tons of videos out there. He's a world-renowned Bible archaeologist. So Uh, very interesting stuff. I had two or three of them I was going to show, and I just happened to pick that one. So, it doesn't do much more than to prove that crucifixion was certainly a means of executing people at the time, and so it stands to reason that Jesus was uh, put to death, executed on the cross at the same time, within the same general time period. So, and
historical writings about crucifixion?
pardon me?
Weren't there also historical writings about crucifixion?
Probably Josephus. I think Josephus may have written on that, but I'm not 100% sure on that much.
I read that it was common.
Yeah,
They had one time up to 1,000 a day.
right.
were
Yeah,
crucified.
yeah,
There was some guy, some emperor or something who was really ticked off at the rebels, and he had them lined for a long distance, nailed to cross, being rebels nailed to crosses for a long distance.
right, right. It was, they say the most horrific means of execution because you die of suffocation, quite frankly.
Pain.
Yeah, and it takes quite a while. And you remember the account they did break the legs of the at least one of the two others that were crucified at the same time, but they didn't break a single bone of Jesus' bones because the I think it's Psalm, forget which one, says that not a bone in his body will be broken. And so they couldn't break his legs, but the other, and he was already passed when they broke the legs, and that's what they would do. If they didn't die, if it took a long time, they just break their legs so that they didn't have the means of supporting themselves
It was
upright.
actually compassionate because the more they had to try to hold themselves
Right.
up, the longer it would take
Yeah.
to die.
Right.
But the other part of the thing where breaking the legs was because time frame.
Exactly. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
we need it because of the Jewish.
Yeah.
The time that it happened. So
Exactly.
very it's the after the weekend.
Exactly. All right. So before we get to our
Well, I could mention something I've read that I get these things show up on YouTube about the Romans, and apparently the Romans, when they're marching around, they'd have water, but the water was mixed with vinegar, and this was something that would kill all the bugs. So they offered vinegar and then water to Jesus.
right,
It's sort of like their equivalent of a peptic.
right,
That's
right.
why he refused.
Yeah. And that too was prophesied that they would offer him vinegar on a stick and so forth. So it's just amazing that we have so much evidence. And I just purchased, it was cheap. It was very inexpensive. Didn't cost me that much. A video from Ingenuity Films, and it's an interview with John Lennox. Is anybody familiar with him?
The name.
Yeah, John Lennox is an older gentleman. He is a professor at Oxford. He's debated Dawkins and I think Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, and probably the most renowned apologist in the world. And um, they did the fellow played Hercules that does all those movies, whose name escapes. Huh?
Kevin Sorbo.
Sorbo, yeah. Actually interviewed him for probably about an hour video. And I could show that sometime if anybody wanted to see it. It's pretty interesting, but he gets into a lot of apologetics and things like um, Richard Hawkins, who was the physicist that passed away a few years ago, claimed that the origin that the universe had, I forget exactly what it is, but this guy takes his statement and breaks it down. And it's some of the things we've already looked at. For example, where did the universe come from? And he points out that 100 years ago, scientists just believed that it was always there. It always existed. But of course, since that time, enough scientific evidence has been presented that it had to have a beginning. It had to come from somewhere. Of course, the the atheists and the Darwinists will say that it's the Big Bang, Well, the question there is, where did that come from? What caused it? But at any rate, it all boils down to his specialty is delineating between science and faith in God. And of course, Lennox is on the faith in God side. And he points out that, a lot of Christians are very good scientists and a lot of atheists are very good scientists, so they agree on a lot of things. The difference is their philosophy and what they've committed themselves to. So it has nothing to do with science versus creation or faith. It's a matter of philosophy and bias, but he's a pretty amazing guy. I love listening to him. I've heard him before, particularly when he debates Richard Dawkins. People familiar with him? The author of The God Delusion, pretty well known atheist. And Lennox does a pretty good job of he handles himself pretty well against that. So maybe sometime I'll bring that if we have a little extra time, and it would take pretty much the whole session if somebody wanted to do that. Maybe get together on a different night like we've done before with the with other films. We could do that. Okay, a couple of articles I came across, and I haven't really been doing the article thing too much, but um, I think it's time that we get back into that a little bit because there's just so much going on, and we really need to keep up to date, I think, with things that are happening. And the reason I was late tonight is that just to kind of demonstrate that things really are still in kind of a crazy state. I thought it would be interesting just to go to Amir Sarfati's Telegram and just list a couple of things that he has discussed over the last several days in no particular order. And starts with just a couple of things um, from his whatever you call it, the Telegram thing, and just some highlights, beginning with number one. Syria's general security forces are marching in Damascus, calling for the invasion of Israel. Now, this guy, the leader of Syria, is the guy that just met with Donald Trump. And he's since taken off his suit, and now he's got his camos back on. And he's back in his Al Qaeda uniform. He said, this is the fellow that's now leading, the president of Syria, who met with Trump and looks so cleaned up and everything. But he said that Al Qaeda is innocent and that the U.S. is the real terrorist organization in an attempt to justify that he and his group are not terrorists. Well, we know the story of what they did to the Kurds and the Druze and other people. Just went in and slaughtered villages and families. This is another one. There was explosions reported at the Damascus airport. One of the things that the people are waiting to see what happens is when will Damascus be destroyed? We know from Isaiah 17 that at some point that's going to happen. So a lot of activity there. Kash Patel just signed, and I don't know why he did it, but he just probably as a representative of the United States signed two memorandums of understanding with Qatar's. Now, Qatar is another very, very shady organization, but yet has been responsible for helping with the ceasefire, even though it's not a ceasefire in Gaza, helping to improve relations between the United States and many Arab nations. But they're also the same group that housed Hamas operatives for a long period of time. So Kash Patel just signed two memorandums of understanding with Qatar's Ministry of Interior to expand bilateral security. In an interview with Tucker Carlson, the prime minister said Qatar wholeheartedly supports the Palestinian people, aka a two-state solution. So there's a lot of close relationships between this administration and those that may not have our best interests at heart. Another one, following a prolonged intelligence investigation, the Shin Bet, which is essentially Israel's CIA, and Israel police uncovered a terrorist infrastructure in the Tukarum area, which is in the West Bank. So naturally, at some point in time, they were going to strike. The Israeli military carried out a wave of strikes in southern Lebanon. Iran has resumed producing ballistic missiles at a high pace. A Muslim nanny tried to poison a Jewish family in France. Muslims in Brussels crashed a Christmas market and decapitated a figurine of Jesus. The IDF struck a Hamas, these are just within the last week or two. The IDF struck a Hamas terrorist who was planning an imminent terror attack against IDF troops in Gaza. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar serve as tools to overthrow the U.S. government, per the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar and Turkey. Now, Turkey, as we all know, is a key player in the Ezekiel 38 invasion. Are applying, this is where it gets, I think, really interesting. And we just, not that we're necessarily going to cave, at least right now, but considerable pressure on President Trump to adopt a disarmament agreement that would preserve Hamas's survival and grant them authority to regroup in 2 years. So he's under a lot of pressure and has, I think, engaged in relations with very strange bedfellows, if you will. So a lot more to come on that. And it's with everything else. It's follow the money. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all those nations are very wealthy, and he has entered into some pretty incredible agreements with them. But we know Saudi Arabia, for example, has made it clear that they're not going to join the Abraham Accords unless and until we agree to put pressure on Israel for a two-state solution. So we already know that interesting, and I don't have an article on this, but President Trump is close to announcing the leaders of this peace initiative in Gaza, of which he is the president. And you know what's interesting? I don't know what to make of it, maybe nothing, but the number of participants, nations, whatever they may be, that are going to be on this board that's going to oversee what happens in Gaza is what? 10. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. But we know there's going to be 10 nations that are going to rise up and basically rise out of as a part of the revived Roman Empire. So there's just a few. I mean, things aren't really a whole lot better over there. If you follow Amir, Israel is just attacking and fighting all over the place. They still are. And you have the ever increasing threat from Syria. And I have an article here, I think I have an article here where Syria has come out and called for the overthrow of Israel. This is under their president that has now formed a new relationship with President Trump. Okay, so a couple of articles I came across. This one is kind of interesting. And we talked about the AI Jesus, remember a year or so ago? Well, here's a new one. When digital Jesus enters the church, trading the Holy Spirit for an algorithm. This is something's happening in a Swiss city. In a quiet Swiss city known for more alpine beauty than theological controversy, a strange glow now flickers inside an old Lucerne church. It's not candlelight. It's not stained glass catching the morning sun. It's a screen. An AI-powered digital Jesus installed right in the confessional booth. More than 1,000 people have already stepped inside to ask questions, to seek guidance, or simply experience the curiosity of it all. The product, titled Deus in Machina, is part academic study, part spiritual experiment, and part cultural provocation, and the world is noticing. The Swiss experience isn't the first. Over the last few years, churches uh, around the world have flirted with technology in startling ways. We know all about AI, and next week, hopefully, I'll give an overview on this Genesis project that Trump just signed I think it was what do you call it? An executive order to basically create almost a Manhattan project, like a Manhattan project or a moon landing project, to really speed up AI development. And it's just incredible. And more on that later. So the Swiss experience isn't the first. Over the last few years, churches around the world have flirted with technology in startling ways. A Lutheran church in Germany drew global attention when it hosted an AI-powered worship service, complete with AI-generated prayers, AI-delivered sermons, and an AI pastor projected on a screen. In the United States, several congregations have used AI generated worship music or sermon outlines to help pastors structure their messages. Each time the reaction has been the same: amazement from the curious, concern from the faithful, confusion among those watching watching the line between human and machine blur in sacred places. Visitors entering the booth can converse with the AI in more than 100 languages. Its responses are drawn from a blend of religious texts and its own real-time processing. So its responses could come from any of a number of different, I suppose it could come from the Quran, it could come from the Bible or whatever source it may come from, Google, wherever. Some users say the experience felt unexpectedly comforting. Others said the answers were vague, generic, and spiritually flat. But here's the problem: no machine, however advanced, can provide spiritual counsel because no machine has a soul. So that's just one more example of how AI, and we read about AI and what's going on with just gathering data and so forth. Here's another one, kind of a different subject, although not completely off base. There's a growing war with Christians. We know about the war against the Jews. We know that the Jews are being persecuted, and I got an article that is really interesting on that front in just a moment. But we're seeing this growing war on Christians, and I want to spend just a few minutes going over a few examples. But here's one, and of all places, surprise, surprise, Portland, Oregon. The title of this is "The War on Christmas Meets the War on Israel at Portland's Tree Lighting." There was a time when Christmas tree lightings were among the safest, simplest joys of American life. But this year in Portland, that light was dim. A holiday tradition meant for children and families was overtaken by political theatrics at the annual tree lighting ceremony as the annual tree lighting ceremony was transformed into a stage for a free Palestine rally with accusations of genocide, chants against Israel, and an unmistakable attempt to inject anti-Israel messaging into a moment meant for celebration and unity. So picture this. What is annually a good time with families to get together and celebrate and light the tree, this stuff starts to break out. For many Christians who were present or later watched the footage, it felt like a desecration of something sacred. Portland officials had already stripped the event of its Christmas identity. It's amazing to me when people think they can do that type of thing. What are they thinking? It's satanic, is what it is. The word Christmas was removed from promotional materials, replaced with the vague the tree, as though the city feared speaking the name of the holiday that birthed the tradition. Even traditional hymns were rebranded holiday songs, and no mention was made of Hanukkah or any other winter celebration. Into that identity vacuum stepped an invited speaker who seized the moment to call Israel's war against Hamas a full blown genocide. Can you picture little kids having to listen to this nonsense? Holding a Palestinian flag and leading the crowd in chanting, Free, Free Palestine. A significant portion of the audience joined in. Others were stunned. Parents with children on their shoulders came expecting Santa and sparkling lights, not a political rally echoing Hamas's talking points. Well, that's just one example, and Lord knows what's going to happen in New York in January with what's going on with the new mayor there, who is not just a Marxist, but he's an Islamist as well. You know, he's the epitome of the red green alliance all wrapped up into one. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
Um, I just got a call today from a friend and one of my friends in England said it's over there. I mean, it's all Muslim.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't do anything Christian. They arrest you or,
right. Okay.
blackball you.
Yep.
It's all being controlled by Islam now.
Yeah. Crazy. Here's another. I'm going to get an article on that issue as well, Jack, in just a moment. Here's another one. This is in Canada. Canada is about over in Canada too. They have gone so far off the deep end up there with their wokeism and have a new Marxist prime minister. But the title of this article: Activists call for child euthanasia. No parental consent for older minors. In 2016, Canada legalized euthanasia, quote, for people whose natural death was reasonably foreseeable and wanted to end their lives. This is the slippery slope. You know, once the nose of the camel gets into the tent, not long before the whole camel's in there. Less than a decade later, that definition has radically expanded, so much so that 1 in 20 deaths in Canada in 2023 were from euthanasia. And activists want it broadened still further to even include children as young as 12 years old. Dying with Dignity Canada, a euthanasia, which is actually murder activist group, believes that maturity rather than age should determine who is eligible for medical assistance in dying and recommends minors as young as 12 be included in the program and goes so far as to suggest that 16 to 17-year-olds shouldn't even need parental consent to be killed by a doctor if they fit broad criteria. Just like here with the abortion thing, they don't want parental consent or gender transition surgeries, that type of thing. But why draw an arbitrary line at 12 years old? Why not younger? We've already seen activists pushing for parents to be allowed to end the lives of disabled newborns and babies. And of course, abortion is legal at any stage of pregnancy um, across Canada already. And one of the things that I picked up on listening to uh, John Lennox is that a quote from an atheist by the name of Peter Singer. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. He's a naturalist from Australia, and he's come out in favor of killing a child after birth if the parents decide defects, whatever those defects may be. So that's just what we're dealing with. I mean, you talk about the Gestapo and what happened in World War II. We're seeing shades of that all over again. Euthanasia is presented as the compassionate response to suffering, but really it's just another way to package murder. But it's God, not humans, who defines compassion and it does not include killing elderly, disabled, sick, or mentally ill men, women, and children. The Bible is clear on that point when it simply states, "You shall not murder." Christians must abide by this foundational principle. And at the end of the article, when we try to be God, the results are disastrous and are always most costly to the most vulnerable, such as those suffering from illness. Instead of trying to be God ourselves, we must subject our wisdom to the true wisdom of the scriptures given to us by the one true God. So kind of goes without saying, when we move away from God, these are the types of things that are going to happen. So our job is to stay firmly entrenched in His Word. So,
When you talked about AI, what is gonna prevent some crazy people to make AIs that like replicate us?
well, I think they're already trying
Yeah.
with
I mean,
robotics, and
like somebody could clone you or me, and
yeah,
we
it's
could do awful things, and then we'd be.
they have the. I think they have the capability right now to clone. If they, like, I think I mentioned that Tom Brady cloned his dog. His dog now is a clone of a dog he had before. So if you can clone a dog, you could probably clone a human. And I,
There's something missing in that part. There's no way the Holy Spirit could be in a clone. They
yeah,
can't
exactly, right,
reproduce that.
right,
So even
right.
if you're relying on AI, it seems to have the answer for everything, but it's, like they were saying, AI as Jesus for confession. There's something major missing.
Oh, yeah,
So,
but yeah,
so
Well,
it
we,
can mislead people to be further and further away from the Lord,
yeah,
which is the
sad.
danger.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And also, um, I mean, they talk and everything. They could, you know what I mean? These AIs, they make them talk, and I don't know. I'm just like, this is really bad.
But our
yeah, and there's no end in
spirits
sight.
should, I think, be able to detect that missing part.
Mhm.
When you're around someplace and you feel like the Lord's kind of speaking through the Spirit, and this is that good. And so that's where Christians have to be strong, help others who are confused with all this, to let them know that this isn't real.
I think we went way too far.
We aren't one of their far.
I think in the conversation we conflated the two different things. You're talking about AI, you're talking about AI. Bob, you were talking about cloning.
Right,
That's
That's-
literal cloning an
right,
animal.
yeah,
Like, remember years ago, they cloned the sheep
Yeah,
dolly?
that was the
Yeah.
first.
Yeah,
That's
that's an animal.
an animal,
Yeah,
How did
but
I wasn't trying to conflate. I was trying to keep them separate.
yeah.
Well, that's
it seems like it wasn't clear that it was two
Yeah,
different things.
right.
AI has no soul,
Right,
has no emotions, has no
Right.
feelings, has no morals, no sense of right and wrong.
right.
Yeah, if we
As
go
far as
back
I
to
know, never will,
Genesis,
but
yeah,
Elon Musk is also doing this. What do you call it? The brain link.
yeah,
It's not the right name.
Neural.
Neuralink.
Neuralink, yeah,
Neuralink, and when that now gets connected with AI and with quantum computing,
right.
you're right. We've crossed the Rubicon, as it's called. But we're going too far,
Yeah.
and we're nowhere near where it's going to get to. But we're already too far.
we are too far
Figure
away.
out. Well, let's put it this way. As I think I mentioned last week, it's really all about Antichrist and him having the tools necessary to track and surveil everybody on the face of the earth. And I've heard experts say that everything needed for him to do that's already in place. So anything now is over and above,
Yeah.
So it's
Fine-tuned, basically.
So animals,
yeah.
they don't have souls to reproduce. So they don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's another talking about Israel and the anti-Semitism. I thought this was an interesting one that I just came across, and it talks about The title of this article is The Next Ingathering or Migration of Jews Back to Israel. Israel practices for emergency aliyah. Aliyah is the return of Jews to Israel. And it goes on to say that the images are haunting. This is a practice that they had, or it's kind of a prototype for something to occur in Israel, in Tel Aviv at the airport. Runway lights cutting through the night, aircraft descending one after another, dreams of exhausted families stepping onto Israeli soil, some trembling, some silent, all fleeing a world that has turned suddenly hostile. And the point is that they had this thing that they engaged in because they can see it developing around the world. And Israel's latest national emergency drill. This is not fiction. It was a sober rehearsal for a future the government fears may be closer than anyone wants to admit. So we all know, right, that any Jew on the face of the earth is an automatic citizen of Israel and can move back there at any time. Because something remarkable and unsettling is happening simultaneously across the West. Anti-Semitism is rising at a velocity not seen in generations. Jewish life in once safe cities is being shaken to its core. And for the first time in decades, major governments are openly warning their Jewish citizens to hide their identity, avoid public gatherings, and prepare for evacuation. That's how bad it's getting all over the world. Against this backdrop, Israel ran a full-scale absorption drill in Ramlah, simulating a mass emergency aliyah. Tens of thousands of Jews fleeing collapsing security conditions abroad. It was the kind of operation we once associated with history books, not modern Europe, North America, or the digital age. But as Israel is preparing for exactly that. So in other words, the anti-Semitism reaches such a peak throughout the world that knowing that they aren't safe, and even they're not going to be safe in New York City, I don't think, in the not too distant future, and other places in America, and certainly in France and Great Britain and Germany and in Belgium and in other places, uh, the anti-Semitism is getting downright dangerous for Jews. So the only place for them to go is back to Israel. Even in the time of war, it's safer for them to go back to Israel than it is to stay in places like New York City. The scenario was intentionally extreme. 800 new arrivals per day, every day, for 2 weeks, no warning, papers incomplete, some unsure whether they even qualified under the law of return. Many traumatized, all needing immediate housing, food, schooling, medical attention, work placement, and security. Every system was tested. This wasn't simply logistics, it was a national stress test designed to reveal how Israel would rescue entire communities under duress. So Israel wouldn't turn away anybody. They couldn't because they're fellow Jews, and Israel belongs to the Jewish people. And so they're just based on what they're seeing around the world, preparing for what they think is a time when there's going to be a mass exodus from different places. Um, the scenario, a particular minister, the Aliyah minister, put it bluntly, this scenario can definitely materialize. Given the state of the world, few could argue otherwise. Israel has lived this story before. During the Russian-Ukraine war, roughly 75,000 Jews arrived within months. In the early 1900s, over 1 million Soviet Jews resettled after the USSR collapsed. In the 80s and the 90s, Israel airlifted thousands of Ethiopian Jews in dramatic, time-sensitive rescue mission. Waves from France, 2014. The pattern is striking. Jewish exoduses rarely come slowly. They arrive like a flood triggered by political upheaval, war, or rapid social breakdown. And all these precedents echo something even older than Israel itself. And more to that, so I won't read that. But think about this: as tragic as that is, what's that tell us? It tells us that God is fulfilling prophecy by bringing and ensuring that the Jewish people return to the four corners of the earth. For example, Ezekiel, and we've read this before, 36:24 says, I will gather you out of the countries and bring you back into your own land. He didn't say how he's going to do it, but he is creating a scenario or allowing scenarios to exist. There are already over 7 million Jews in Israel. And the numbers have just been exploding ever since 1948, but particularly over the last decade or so. Isaiah described the same moment. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. Can you make this stuff up? To read an article like this and go back to the Old Testament 2,500 years ago, where these things are prophesied. Jeremiah went even further. I will bring them from the north country and gather them from the farthest parts of the earth. The prophets repeatedly warned of a future when the nations would grow hostile, when Jewish communities would feel pressure on all sides, and when Israel would become the refuge, the final harbor, calling her people home. Folks, we're watching prophecy being fulfilled right before our eyes with what's going on, particularly in Israel. To me, it's just amazing. Comments on that? Got a couple more here, and we'll just take a look at these and then get into our PowerPoint.
Uh, just kind of carrying on this discussion a little bit. The latest roundtable, with Patrick Wood and Scott Townsend and Rich Gillette, which was just 3 weeks ago, maybe. They're describing in scary detail how systems are really, to what you said a moment ago, already in place for the Antichrist.
Yeah.
AI in particular,
Right.
augmented with quantum computing, but also CBDCs, which you've talked about for years now,
Right.
as a way to control everyone's assets and money
Yep.
individually, not
Right.
like as a country or a town or something, but everyone individually shuts you off. You can't buy food, or
Yeah.
your money's worthless all of a sudden, that sort of a thing. But it's the sense of urgency is, and you said a moment ago, 7 million Jews. The latest number I heard, which was in the last month, was that it's 10 million. It's unbelievable.
Well, there's 10 million, including others, not
Oh,
just
that might be,
Jews.
that
Yeah.
might be,
Yeah.
I thought it was true,
Right.
but that might be, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting how, if you think back when COVID came about and the progress of getting to where we are now has just been really coming faster and faster and faster.
Right.
So when you correlate that with the scriptures and prophecy, you
Right.
can actually, we all sat here together for the past 5 years watching what's going on,
Right.
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
and some of us were shut down in our homes for a number of months, but once we were released, we're here talking, and you can feel it. You can feel the
Yeah.
rapid change.
You absolutely can.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been sitting here for more than 20 years,
Mhm.
and until the last 3 or 4 years,
Yeah, since
the
COVID.
change was kind of linear, kind of slow. We'd see prophecies being fulfilled slowly. In the last, especially year, but if you go back 3 or 4 years, it's become almost exponential.
Yeah.
It's
It really has.
Multiplying.
Yeah. When we talk about what we're talking about tonight, it's just barely the tip of the iceberg of things that are going on. You know, and
everything you said about you from Amir tonight. I'm pretty sure that all of those were within not more than a week. The last
exactly.
week. It
Yes.
wasn't 2 or 3 weeks. It's
Right.
within the last
Yeah.
few days.
That was my point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It seemed like everything went haywire after COVID.
You know, that was kind of like a milestone. It really was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
think it was
changed.
Holy
It
moly,
changed.
agenda being
Yeah,
Preparing us.
Yeah,
really
there's another word.
you're
for
right.
that.
advanced thing.
You're right.
Also a test as to what they could get away with.
Catalyst.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. You're right.
Exactly.
One more quick article, and talking about Christians under attack. We just looked at what's going on in uh,
Janet?
Portland and other places. Here's an article: Christians on trial. Find a pastor, first a pastor in Canada, now a teacher in Ireland. Now, these things are really happening. We talk about just the demonic activity that is taking place everywhere. Here's an article that says that yesterday we brought you the story of Pastor Derek Reimer in Calgary, Alberta, who was hauled away in handcuffs, not for violence, not for hate, but refusing to bow to a court order demanding he apologize for peacefully protesting drag story time at public libraries. His crime was standing on biblical conviction. His punishment was being forced to renounce that conviction publicly. When he refused, the state responded the only way modern soft tyranny seems to know how: arrest, pressure, and public humiliation. Which reminds me of I think it was on the Fox website of a mother who has been ordered. She's divorced from well, she was never married to the father of her daughter, who's 12 years old. And it's up in Portland, I think it's in Maine, a Maine case where this girl, 12 years old, uh, has been ordered by the court. She was attending a Calvary Chapel church in Portland or someplace up in Maine. And her father, when he heard about it, who's not never married the mother, uh, went ballistic and brought a court action, and the judge ruled that she is not allowed to attend church, not allowed to attend any Easter services, Christmas services, or whatever. And this girl is devastated because her friends are all there. And now she's being prohibited from going there. Now, I think there's probably a 90% chance that the appellate court will overrule that, because this makes no sense whatsoever. You talk about a violation of the First Amendment. That's it. But people say, why doesn't the mother just continue to allow her to attend the church? And the answer is, if she did that, she'd lose her child. So the pressure is being brought to bear. So here's getting back to this. Today's story. So this is a fella in Canada who was arrested for protesting drag story time at public libraries. And that's something that's been happening throughout the United States for the last several years. But today's story shows the line is simply not being crossed, it's being erased. And this happened in Ireland. Enoch Burke is a Christian teacher who has now spent more than 450 days in prison, not because he committed a crime, but because he refused to speak words he believes to be a lie. Like countless Christians, he stands on the truth of Genesis 1:27, the simple declaration that God created them male and female. When a biologically male student requested to be called they, them, the school demanded that Burke comply, but he could not. To him, this wasn't a matter of courtesy, it was a matter of integrity before God, a question of participating in something Scripture says is false. And for that stand, the machinery of the state began to turn. First, he was placed on disciplinary leave. Then he was fired. Oops. Then he was fired. Um, then the court ordered him to stay away from school grounds until the dispute concluded. Most people would comply even if they disagreed, but Enoch Burke does not believe the state has the authority to command him to violate God's created orders. In other words, I cannot be forced to deny biblical truth. So he returned to the school. Now, was that the smartest thing to do? Maybe not. But he was standing on his principles, on his biblical beliefs. And again and again. For returning to court, uh, for return, the court found him in civil contempt. The type of punishment is chilling because it has no end date. His sentence continues indefinitely until he agrees to obey the order. Judges call it holding the keys to his own cell. If he promises to stay off school property, he walks free. If he refuses, he remains behind bars. And for more than 450 days, he's refused. So, is the guy the smartest bulb, the brightest bulb on the tree for doing it? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say, but I do give the guy credit for standing on his values and biblical principles. So, this is happening virtually all over the world. So as he says, this one last comment here, this should terrify anyone who values liberty. So the question is that the type of thing that's going to come to the United States? You know, we don't really know, but I think it will. I think it stands to reason that we're going to see these types of things materialize here. Things that Jack was saying, things are so bad in Great Britain right now with just the total loss of freedom and religious tyranny and everything that's just taken place over there. To say nothing about the coming surveillance, and John talks about digital identity and CBDCs. Starmer came out, and I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and you probably saw it in the news, and basically said that I think by 2029 in Great Britain, they will have digital identity, and anybody who resists will not be able to work. Sound familiar? Does it sound like maybe Revelation 13? Without the mark, you won't be able to buy or sell. So, questions, comments on any of those? Just a, like I said, tip of the iceberg stuff.
Is the what is the reason that AI is has so much power behind it? What are the stated positive things that are supposed to come from AI? I mean, there must be some facade of some kind that's out there that says this is all the benefits we're going to get from AI. What is that?
Productivity for one. Work productivity is going to just cause that to explode with at the expense of jobs. If you get into quantum computing and some of the really advanced AI, the ability to solve, uh, cure diseases, come up with solutions to all kinds of problems, you know, like with quantum and 6G and other technology, not just AI, but combining all those together, the capabilities are just limitless. You know, an AI in the right hands is not bad. You know, it can have an awful lot of useful, wonderful outcomes, but in the wrong hands, like Antichrist, for example, which is that's what this is all about. The stage is being set for Antichrist to come on the scene. That's why we're seeing such an exponential growth. That's why we have this Genesis project that Trump just really pumped up the $500 billion for uh, what do they call those things, John, that they're building all over the place? The
Data centers.
data centers and I don't know how it's going to happen.
That they're pulling, is it?
The amount of energy and water required for those things is mind-boggling.
When
So
you take this to the ridiculous extreme, nobody's going to be working because AI is going to run
I know,
everything.
really.
So the economy has to be
Yeah.
total
Gonna fail.
government handout.
exactly. Exactly.
If
Yeah,
you
yeah, that's
want-
where you get into things like universal payments. You know, I forget exactly what the term is for that, but guaranteed income for citizens. Because you're right. I mean, take it to its logical conclusion. Now that's, I think, years down the road, but we're already starting to see. You take, for example, um, I was just listening to an analyst yesterday talking about AI and quantum computing and just what they're able to do in warehouses with there's a company, I forget what the name of the company is, that can come in, and John probably knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. And they retrofit these places with with robotics and AI, so they move packages and stack packages and move goods and things, at lightning speed, without any human help.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a pharmaceutical.
It's like
revolution.
assembly lines.
There's no lights in the.
Right.
They don't need them. Robots don't need lights.
Well, that's what a data center looks like too. They don't, there's no lights, hardly any humans in there, so they don't need lights really.
Yeah.
If you listen to the business, news channels, um, I've the numbers are growing all the time, and I can't remember all the numbers that I've heard, and a lot of them seem to conflict. But it's fair to say that there's already been tens of thousands of jobs lost to AI, maybe hundreds of thousands, and next year for sure there will be millions of jobs lost, and that's not insignificant.
No.
That's a lot of jobs, and part of it you think too is what Bob has, I think, quoted Maggie Thatcher several times, saying, something like socialism is great until you run out of other people's money. You can't have all these people out of work, but no one knows how many will be, or how those people that lose their jobs will be trained or retrained, or what they'll do, or who will support them in the meantime. But we're getting announcements like from Amazon announcing 100,000 job cuts next year because, this is happening all over. It's
Yeah.
not one company like Amazon.
And it's while
all
they're
over.
announcing record profits.
Oh, yeah. And the
Yeah, I want to get
companies
into
just
our get into this a little bit if I could. So that's all good stuff. But um, I think if we want to know, like I've said before, if we really want to know where we are in God's prophetic time clock, we really need to look at Israel. And so that's what we're going to spend some time doing. We do that every year. I'm going to try to hit it from a couple of different angles and maybe what we've uh, looked at in the past. We've spent time in the past, still as relevant can be. Looking at Genesis 12, where God lays out the Abrahamic covenant, and in Genesis 13 and 15 and other places, he codifies um, that covenant by making it everlasting, unilateral, unconditional. So the Abrahamic covenant kind of is overarching. It's the promise that God made to Abraham and his descendants to build a great nation, to bless Israel, to bless Abraham, to be the nation, the people through whom all nations would be blessed. And that, of course, is a promise that the Messiah would come through the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, down through to David, ultimately to Joseph, and so forth, and Mary. And so all of these promises, and he made it crystal clear that these were everlasting, unconditional. The only one that is needed for the fulfillment of this covenant is God. It's not a two-sided covenant; it's strictly God. So I think we're all pretty well up to speed on that. But I wanted to hit it maybe from a couple of different angles, beginning with this slide that I just simply entitled that the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise. We have that prophecy in Second Peter chapter 3, where it says, "Where is the promise of his coming?" Our forefathers, and I'm paraphrasing and so forth, have said for centuries that he's going to come back, but he hasn't. Slowness. I mean, we know that from Second Peter, I think it is, and also I forget exactly. I think it's in the Psalms where it states that for the Lord 1,000 years is a day. So while we look at 1,000 years as a long period of time, to God it's not, because we have to understand he's outside, he's in eternity, we're in a very limited space-time continuum. So he sees things altogether different. And when he makes promises, or he tells us what he's going to do it. He means what he says and he does what he means. So, or says what he means, it's whatever. So he is going to fulfill them. So what he's doing is he's allowing, and we've talked about that, I think, by when we just mentioned the anti-Semitism and this practice, uh, thing that they had in Israel about the potential for a mass aliyah, that he's allowing the Middle East to be a problem that mankind's never going to solve. That's why I wanted to go through those various points that Amir made. That no peace treaty, no peace agreement is ever going to work. Jesus is the one that's ultimately going to solve the problem. That's what the scriptures say. All good intentions, and so forth, but they're not going to work. In fact, it's my view, and this is not a thus saith the Lord, but my view is that what the administration has done recently by trying to do so much so fast in terms of foreign policy, particularly with the Middle East, is to subject themselves to even possible extortion by some of these nations. And I, for one, don't put a lot of stock and trade in what Qatar says. I certainly don't put any stock and trade in what the president of Syria says. Even Saudi Arabia, they have ulterior motives, and with them and Qatar, it's all about the money. So we just need to be cautious in that regard. Again, good intentions, but when Trump comes out and says, we've solved this 3,000-year-old problem. It's kind of like, no, you haven't, and you're not going to. So, but we can't fault them for what they're trying to do. Peace can't last forever. When I say peace can't last forever, I'm talking about this temporary peace agreement that's just been struck in the Middle East, which really isn't lasting because we're so close to the rider on the white horse, and the rider on the white horse in Genesis 6 is the coming Antichrist. Everything tells us that time when he makes his appearance is so close. I'm not saying tomorrow or the next day, but it's close. And so the idea of a lasting peace uh, just doesn't resonate or doesn't fit with his imminent appearing on the scene. Also, it's about that I said here that at best we can look at the current peace agreement as a possible precursor to what might take place in the Ezekiel 38 war. That whole thing with the Ezekiel 38 Gog Magog invasion is still fomenting and percolating, if you will. But before it can take place, Israel has to be in what they perceive to be peace and safety. All peace agreements that involve Israel are just band-aids over an unhealed wound. We have Islam that goes back to around 700 AD. It didn't even come into existence until then. And now people are even questioning if Muhammad even existed. There's questions along that line. Muslims believe, here's the scary thing, and with Muslims, and we're seeing an explosion of Islamic influence in the United States now. I mean, look at what's going on in New York City and what's going on in Minneapolis, in Michigan, and was it somewhere out in either Oregon or Washington? They also elected I don't know if she's a Muslim, but very radical people being put into place, and we have the Omars and others are beginning to infiltrate. And of course, in places like France and Great Britain, as Jack said, they're literally taking over.
Minnesota.
Minnesota, exactly. Muslims believe they've been called by Allah to wipe out the Jews. It's a religious belief, and so we're not saying that every Muslim has a desire to wipe the Jews off of the face of the earth, but it's part and parcel to Islam. It's included in the Quran and the Hadith writings. So there really is such a thing as a moderate Muslim, and that whole ideology is there. Islam's ideology of death is not going to die out until Jesus returns. Now, I do believe that when the Ezekiel war takes place, that much of the radical Islam, much of what we see today in terms of radical Islam, is going to be dealt a very serious setback that God Himself is going to orchestrate. And when that happens, I believe it's pre-trib. And with that, with the radical Islamic influence being really curtailed by by God's intervention in that war, that allows, if you will, the Antichrist to come up out of the revived Roman Empire. So everything's just kind of fall into place. We have Macron, the president of France. I don't know why I threw this in there, but he did. He just recently called Mahmoud Abbas a peacemaker. You know, Mahmoud Abbas wrote his dissertation on the fact that the Holocaust never occurred. He's the one that replaced Yasser Arafat. Um, so get down to this one. So I just want to go through this and we'll get through it. I'm just going to read these very quickly because time is virtually up. But the idea that God is not finished with Israel. So we have to understand that God has a distinct plan for natural Israel. When I say natural Israel, the Jewish people, he has a plan for Israel. He has a plan for church. And of course, they both come together at the cross. But he has a plan for Israel that's kind of on hold right now, although we see the stage being set. That's what dispensationalism is all about. God has a separate plan for Israel and a separate plan for the church, and they're all going to take place in his time period. That's all dispensationalism is. And dispensationalism in the church today sometimes gets a bad rap. Jesus is going to put Israel in a time of tribulation at the end of the age. He's going to purge, bless, and restore Israel, and he's going to return to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. Where is that? That's in Israel. So it's significant. The tribulation is not for the church. The first 69 weeks, remember, we spent a lot of time in Daniel 9 last week, were all about Israel. This time period is for you and your people, for your city, and for you, Daniel. When he's talking about you and your people, he's talking about the Jewish people. That final week, that 70th week that's yet to take place, is all about Israel. He's going to give them a second chance to receive their Messiah. I want to get into a little bit more on that next week. And if you think about Sodom, it's a type of the earth that will be judged with fire. The church is pictured as being above the scene. So picture, I think it's Genesis 18 maybe, where God is communicating with Abraham, and Lot's also there, but he's particularly communicating with Abraham, and God's telling him he's going to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah. And actually, Lot at that point was in Sodom. So Abraham says, will you destroy the wicked as long as there are any righteous there? Will you destroy them as long as there are 50 righteous people? God says, no, I won't do it. And then what if there, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but what if there are 40? No. 30? No. 10? No. In other words, as long as there are any righteous people, God would not bring destruction upon Sodom. And then he tells Lot, the angels tell Lot and his family to get out of Sodom because judgment's coming. Type of a rapture, if you will. They're taken out before it occurs. And so what we have with Sodom is God, and he's not going to bring his judgment as long as there's righteous people on the earth. Now, once it starts, people will become righteous, but before the tribulation, the righteous, those that have accepted Christ, we become righteous when we accept Christ. They're going to be removed. And God's not going to bring judgment on Sodom as long as there were any righteous people present. So we got this incredible scenario that we read from Israel's history, past, present, and future. And so we'll talk more about that in the weeks to come. A lot to be said, but God has a plan for Israel, and that's one of the things that the replacement theologians try to tell us. Those that believe in replacement theology, Israel has been replaced by the church, and we're going to see in no uncertain terms that's not the case. We see that in the book of Romans, particularly in so many other places. And that's the nature of the everlasting covenant. God said, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashores. Never will I forsake you or give up on you. Never. The sun, the moon, the stars will cease to exist before I would ever give up on them. So,
Sorry, Tom.
I think that was a sign we better stop.
No.
So, that's it for tonight. Questions, comments?
That issue of our Muslims, I don't know of, and there may be examples of where moderate Muslims have been able to shuttle aside the radicals. It's
What's that?
always the other way. The radicals come in, and suddenly the moderates are either going along with it or they're real. And that's going to be happening in this country too. Whenever the Muslims become the majority, you've got, if you're not a Muslim, you have bad choices on it.
Right.
You have no good choices.
Right. One other thing before we go, you're right. They're very patient. They've got a plan. Their plan is as long as it takes. They desire a worldwide caliphate under the under Sharia law. That's what their goal is. I don't know. I also read one thing today, just before we wrap it up. I don't know if people saw it or not, but things looked as though they were getting pretty tense between China, not Taiwan, but China and Japan. There was an incident that took place where China sent some radar into international. I don't know exactly what it was, but um, Japan took issue with it, and Japan has come out and said this could result in a catastrophic outcome. So just one more potential scenario. Hopefully nothing comes of it, but yeah, China and Japan, China and Taiwan, China and the Philippines, China and the United States, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, the rest of the world, Russia and Europe, Russia and Poland, and the Middle East and Venezuela and Colombia and Brazil, and it's just Mexico,
Cambodia,
huh?
Cambodia,
Everywhere. Yeah.
something I heard in the news today.
Yeah, I didn't catch
And what we're
that.
talking about is, the Chinese jets locked their radar onto Japanese.
Is that what it was?
jets.
Yeah. Which I don't understand, but apparently that's something you don't do.
You don't do that until you're ready to fire.
Ah, okay. All right. So, Lord, we just again thank you and we marvel, Lord. We live in such exciting times. It's so easy to get distracted, but we need to stay focused on you and your word, your promises. That you're never going to leave us or never forsake us, and we can put our faith and trust in you and not have to think about the evils of this world. And it's hard, Lord. It's hard for us to do that. We're only human, as they say. So give us the strength that we need, Lord, and help us to. We actually need help to follow you in so many different instances. But Lord, I just pray that you give us that strength and wisdom that we need in the days to come. And I pray for everyone here. Pray for those that are listening. Bring us back safely next week. For it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.